Good morning, everyone. This is Lee Gaseoma. Lumatalang ba ang kwakwat umay tamum tsuwalte obi uma pasyan. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your participation today. At the request of the presenters, we would like for you to post your comments and questions in the chat box throughout the presentation. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we will go back and review the communication that has been placed in the chat box. And with that, I will turn the virtual mic over to Treva Roanhorse and Dr. Elmer Guy, and they will go ahead and introduce themselves. Treva?
Good morning. Yat Elpene Shea Treva Roanhorse in Shea. Twadre the winner shadow. Again, show Twachini the Shaki, Ani the Shichido, Taban the Chanel. Yeah, Kudushan Yankees Nahodila. Good morning. My name is Treva Roanhorse. I'm Navajo from Toachi, New Mexico. Today, I will be presenting the history of American NVR projects plus the Consortia of Administrators for Native American Rehabilitation. I was the former director of the Navajo Nation Office of Special Ed and Rehab Services and also president of KNAR. Now I'd like to turn it over to Elmer Guy.
Good morning. Thank you, Treva. I'm Elmer Guy. Currently, I'm president of Navajo Technical University, one of the 37 tribal colleges and universities. The presentation today about the American Indian Vocational Rehabilitation Service Projects. I used to be a director for Navajo Vocational Rehabilitation Program when it got started. And it was interesting to see the development of the program. I'm really glad it's still going strong today. It's a lot stronger than way back when we got started in 1975, I guess. So good morning, everyone.
We will be providing you an overview of the history of how American Indian vocational rehabilitation programs got started under the leadership of Dr. Elmer Guy and with the assignment from Dr. Herb Leibowitz out of Region 8, not Region 8, Region
9.
Region 9 out of San Francisco. Prior to the closure of the regions, RSA used to have regional offices in 10 areas, and under Navajo, we were under Region 9, Region 8, and Region 10 and 6. So Elmer will talk about that, how it got started, why vocational rehabilitation and American Indian Alaska Natives with disabilities was very important so for Indian tribes to establish their own programs. The objective is that we will talk about the key stakeholders of who paved the way for establishing American Indian VR, also provide a detailed overview of the highlights of key events that happened and bringing about change in the provision of VR services for employment outcome with individuals with disabilities. The last one is that how KNAR, the Consortium of Administrators for Native American Rehabilitation, was founded and who the founding members were. This part, one of the things that I want to say prior to turning it over to Elmer is that the American Indian VR started in the 1970s, mainly under also the leadership of the late Dr. Dylan Patero. Dylan Patero used to be Division Director of Education for the Navajo Nation. Is under also his leadership. That's where Office of Special Education was situated within the Department of Education. And from there, he met with the state agencies because there was an increase of referrals of Navajo individuals with disabilities into the state VR agency. So that first part, I will go ahead and address, talk about that. So with that, the state agency wanted to know, what can Navajo do to probably look at the population of increase of referrals. And that's where the communication happened. And then through that, an innovation establishment grant was awarded to the Navajo Nation. At that time, it was called Navajo Vocational Rehabilitation Program, NVRP. So with that, now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Guy.
Thank you, Treva. This is when I joined to work for the Navajo Nation government. I was working on my master's degree at the time at the University of San Francisco, studying the master's in rehabilitation administration. Navajo Nation had a 3-year agreement with the state of Arizona, what they used to call establishment grants. And the federal RSA requires state to match their grants to states. So Arizona and many other state VR, they didn't have enough money to match their federal grant. So Arizona would do that. They would put out establishment grants and allow nonprofits to help match their grant. And so that's how Navajo got this grant. And Navajo didn't match that grant. And but then the whole intent was to bring services closer to Navajo people. The states in Arizona, they had an office in Flagstaff, which is about a 3-hour drive from Navajo. They hardly came to Navajo. I think they made a trip once a month or something. How can you adequately serve a population that today is over 300,000 by just sending 1 or 2 people once a month to serve them? And so that was the main purpose, was to allow Navajo to build its capacity so that they could train VR counselors, train Navajo how to do case management, how to do eligibility, and then the AIVRPs and so forth. Unfortunately, the grant ended after 3 years. But there was a legislation, there was an amendment in 1978 of the Rehabilitation Act that had language in the legislation that basically allowed funding to Indian tribes, called Section 130, Part D. And the language, the authorizing language says funding could be allocated up to 1%. But RSA never appropriated any money. It's always been 0. And so after the 3-year grant ended, there was a tri-state, because Navajo is it's a large area. It covers Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And now there's a strip of land in Colorado today. And so Navajo had cases in those 3 states, mainly Arizona and New Mexico. And so they did a tri-state agreement with Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah DVR for 1 year. And we were trying to change the amendment. And so after that 1 year, then Navajo, we were able to get earmarks from Congress using that statutory language in the law, allowing the RSA to fund tribes. So we were getting 650,000 or so per year for about maybe 4 years, and it was earmarked for Navajo. And until the language had changed and amendment had changed, and then all we did was where it said the language up to 1%, we put language in that said no less than 1/4 of a percent and no more than 1%. So which allowed then the Congress to appropriate 1/4 of 1%. And that then provided money for RSA, which was, I think, around $1.4 million. And that was the beginning of stable funding for Indian tribes. And when we made that legislation change, I think it went, maybe it was 3 million that it went up to. But there was a process to for RSA to figure out how they would do their grant requests and tribes to apply. They had certain requirements. And so we made that amendment of no less than 1/4 of 1%. And then we also put language in the bill to create research and training centers. And here's that slide. And so I guess the additional projects then started in 85 to 86. There are 3 additional tribes, and then there were more after those years. It keeps adding from there. The research and training centers were also funded. And that is to help define the needs of American Indians with disabilities. What are the needs of individuals? What are the needs of tribes in serving the people? Actually, there were 2 centers that were funded, one at NAU and one at University of Arizona. And which was, they did a lot of studies back then. There was a lot of studies both universities did. And the other thing I thought that was important was that we also created a interagency council with the federal government, to where Department of Education, the RSA, Indian Health Services, others to work together in serving people with disabilities. And I don't know if that council is still active today, but we saw a need for other federal agencies besides RSA to serve people with disabilities. Because on Indian communities, you have Indian Health Services. They provide a lot of health care. A lot of people with disabilities need that health care, as well as education. You know, it goes down to an earlier age. It goes to high schools, into special education and so forth. So we saw a need to do that. And that was all part of making those amendments back then. And then we also request Congress to have a public hearing on to allow for tribes to present their testimonies. And they had that meeting in Albuquerque. It seemed like back then, Congress were more open to hear from the public. And as compared to today, it's just, today they just go on party line and they just push legislations through without really hearing from the public. And I don't know if that's a good way to just pass legislations without hearing from the people. And so that was worked back then that way. And it's really interesting to see how some of the work got started. And it was support also from the Navajo Nation government, and they were really supportive. And one year we ran out of money, and they were able to give us money to at least to survive until the federal money came in. And that's also something I think important, is to really work with tribes and tribes to use their resources like Navajo did. And because it's really their people, and they need to share resources, I think. So that was the basis of the rehab amendments. is just to change that no less than 1/4. And I think same strategies followed as amendments were made, increasing up to no less than 0.5% and so forth. I think that was a really, it seemed like it's really small amendment, but it's huge. It's really huge when you really calculate a small percentage, and it really benefits Indian people. So thank you for that quick.
I wanted to also mention 1 year there was no funding. So what the 3 state agency that the reservation extends to for Navajo, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, they came together and they allocated funds. At the beginning, there were 162 cases that were transferred to Navajo, and also 55 from New Mexico, 162 from Arizona. And Arizona was the lead agency under the directorship of Larry Powers. And they assigned a counselor supervisor to us. We used the Arizona VR manual, also the forms. And they also track the data, any referrals that we get, any of those clients determined eligible who are in the service plan and an employment outcome, or they were sick, they were closed prior to job placement. So they provided that data to us through Arizona RSA, and they were very supportive. So at one time, the 3 states came together and provided funding to the program. Now we go to what happened of the American history in the 90s. As Winona said, the 90s was, it was happening. So the 1992 amendment of the Rehab Act that increased funding for American Indian VR programs. They also, RSA also added 10 additional points, priority preference to those tribes that are reapplying. And so if Navajo reapplied, they got 10 points priority preference, and any of the other tribal VR programs that were reapplying. And then the physical allocation, the funding allocation was less than 1/2 of 1%. That increased to 1/4 of 1/2 of 1%. That's a mouthful. The other thing that happened was to expand the grants from 3 to 5 years. By the time a program got started, there were a lot of that they had to really work fast to establish their policies, set up the program, recruit staff, and do all that. So by the time they start moving forward with getting the program going, providing the services, and in their grant application, they might say, we're going to serve 100 clients year 1, and we're going to job place, 50. But sometimes, that was a real challenge. So we advocated that they extend the number of years that it was the funding years. So that was extended to 5 years. There was also the capacity building projects for American Indian projects that were established. I'm going to go ahead and when I finish the rest, I'm going to turn that over to Lee and Winona. They can touch on that. They also addressed the near reservation, the needs, because with Navajo, we have students or students that are bused off the reservation to public schools. Navajos who work off reservation, but their primary home is on the reservation. So they left that language at to the discretion of the tribes, how they define near reservation. With Navajo, it's a 20-mile radius outside the reservation area. So that one was added. And then the 2 things that we really pushed for, but was not recognized, was permanent funding for tribal VR. The other one was establishing community rehab programs, because at the time there was that CRP that where they could go on site and get the services. But we wanted those kind of centers to be established on Navajo and in Indian country, but those 2 areas, they weren't considered. And then designing a reporting system which would track the data of tribal VR. And then the other one, of course, is the Workforce Investment Act that was implemented in 1998. And under Title IV is where the Rehab Act was included. They wanted to consolidate, like Elmer mentioned, the interagency agreement, workforce development, Indian Health Services, the educational component, and all of these to bring it together so that the individual with disabilities will have access to those different components. They also created local investment boards, which Tribal VR served on. Even at the state level, those statewide investment boards were established. So there's communication and there's advocacy for individuals with disabilities from Indian country on how they can consolidate and why it's important that services to American Indians with disabilities is not only by VR, but they have opportunities to access services to the other components. That's why that was that the whole thing was placed under the Workforce Investment Act. And then Section 121 changed to Section 120, Section 130 Part D was changed to Section 121 Part C. And then when we had the national conference or the annual conference of KNAR in 1997 in Seattle, that's where we provided these testimonies. Next. Now we go to the Consortium of Administrators of Native American Rehabilitation, KNAR. Before I go there, I'd like to turn it over to Lee or Winona to talk about capacity building.
Okay, this is Lee again. I'm very impressed with the sharing of the history of how tribal vocational rehabilitation programs have come about. I failed to mention in my brief introduction at the beginning that today's webinar is part of celebrating the November 2021 National Native American Heritage Month. I believe as we go through this webinar, we can recognize and be appreciative of the fact that the initial folks like Treva and Elmer who had the foresight and the vision as to what could be realized where we're at today, it really is a sacrifice in itself. So we should be very thankful for the initial forefathers, if you will, advocating for tribal members with disability to ensure that we work with our tribal leadership as well to sustain these services for the future. That being said, I came into tribal voc rehab in 1992 while being a doctoral student here at Northern Arizona University, and came on board as a graduate research assistant for the American Indian Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. And in 1996, I was hired as the first project coordinator for the capacity building for American Indian project. And on the screen, you see a photo of some of the staff that were with us. You see Julie Clay there, a strong supporter and advocate for tribal members with disability. You see Priscilla there, third lady on the left, Charlene Brown, Winona, John Sargent, Dita Williams, and last but not least, Sherry Moktaima. Rest in peace, Sherry. So the capacity building project here at NAU was one of 8 university grantees that received funding from RSA to increase the participation of minority entities and tribal colleges and university, the Hispanic educational institution, the historically Black colleges and universities were all given the opportunity to increase participation in going after funding that was available to address the needs of the minority population. So here at AIVRS, our mission was to work with the then existing tribal voc rehab programs. I don't recall the exact number, but in partnership with San Diego State University, Western Washington University, and Southern University, we then started providing national grant writing workshops. And that was to address the needs, the technical needs of the programs and the tribes who had the desire to prepare more quality grant proposals to meet the selection criteria of this particular funding source. And when successfully funded, we then made site visits with the grantees to provide technical assistance. So long story short, I believe we were around for close to 15 years when it was determined that we had done the best that we could while recognizing that the needs did continue in Indian country. And we still do have some material from those days. So if you are interested in reviewing and for consideration in the development of your grant proposals, please let us know and we'll provide you with the handbook. With that, Winona, you want to add anything else to those years?
Said it all, Lee. The 90s were great, just like 90s country, like I said.
Okay, the first AirTech director was, I wanted to acknowledge her, Dr. Marilyn Johnson, and the director for the one that was funded down at University of Arizona was Dr. Jenny Jo. Now we go to KNAR. This was under the leadership of Dr. Ken Naliai, the first person that's standing on your left. In the Rehab Act, there was, a section there that was funded. And one of the things at University of Arizona, Northern Colorado, out of Region 8, was that they wanted to focus on American Indian VR, what they can do to help build the capacity, to really make sure that there's recognition that the services, the support system is there. So that was established in January of 1993. They collaborated with American Indian Rehabilitation Training Center from NAU to address the future of VR services to American Indian and Alaska Natives with disabilities. Our first meeting occurred in January of 1993 in Denver. At that time, we were still under 130. There were 6 of us that came together from Region 8, even though, they always included Navajo in this. Sid Claymore from Standing Rock, he was the project director for Standing Rock VR. Mike Hermison was the director of Salish. Rusty Cantrell with the Assiniboine Sioux, Steve Galvey from Chippewa Cree out of Montana, Maria Estes Lower Brule from South Dakota, and myself from the Navajo Nation. And during this meeting, they provided us the mission of KNAR, and then what the purpose of KNAR will be. KNAR will be a voice, will be a vehicle, will be an advocate on behalf of American Indian VR programs and the services to support travel VR programs in the area of professional development, training as a support system, as an advocate. So we came together and we talked about some of the ways that we can start moving the agenda forward. The first, also at that time, with the consensus of all of us, Rusty Cantrell, rest his soul, he was appointed as president of KNAR. And in the first conference in Colorado, Denver also, was when we had the first election for KNAR president. And the first president of KNAR was Sid Claymore. I always tease Joe Kelly about that. Sid and I, we ran for president. there was a room full of people, and Joe Kelly announced the election results. Sid Claymore got 40 plus votes, and he raises his finger, and Treva Roanhorse only got 1. So, you know, that was always a joke between Joe and I. But that's how we got started. Also to establish partnership with the state VR agencies. RSA, RCEP stood for Regional Rehabilitation Continuing Ed Programs. CSA VR, you know, consortia, Council of State Administrators, Vocational Rehabilitation, and other national organization, tribal governments, other tribal organization, to, you know, to look at the needs of tribal members with disabilities in areas where VR programs are being, VR services are being provided, and then those tribal communities where there are no VR programs, how do we expand and go beyond that? So that's where all these players we thought would be important to come together as a support system to KNAR. Next.
Driva, let me, I'd like to comment on this. I think this is a very important step in developing Indian VR. We've attempted to do this earlier, and we didn't have no money. And so even though we get 130 money, we're not allowed to use the federal money to lobby. And so we were trying to create a vehicle, and we asked actually Marilyn Johnson. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to touch it because she had to be very careful. And it took, you know, Ken to really make it happen. And similar to CSA VR, they have that's their vehicle to the state VR agency. And so I think KNAR really did an excellent job advocating for Indian VR. You need that vehicle, and they've established a good credibility. And you got to have that credibility in order to have members of Congress listen to you. And I think they did a really good job. And without it, I think would have been very challenging. So I think that was the right move, and the right decision of the Indian VR directors to come together. And I think they're still very active today. So I just wanted to make that comment.
During the 1996 reauthorization, KNAR presented 22 amendments that would significantly impact tribal VR programs, you know, in a positive manner. We called it the KNAR 22, and that was presented on October 29th, 1996. And I'm not going to read each one of them, but for your information, the first one is that tribal VR be included on the State Rehab Council, Advisory Council. That was very important because each state has a rehab council. And at that time, there were probably at least 20 plus programs. I mean, of the number of programs, they were probably located in 20 plus states. And it was important for us to be at the table because when the state get funded, they count everybody. Even if regardless if there's a tribal VR program within their state, like in Oklahoma and Alaska, there are a lot of tribal, there are about 10 or so tribal VR programs, but they still count, you know, then they get that data and they present it, and that's how they get their formula funded. So it was important for us to advocate, you know, on behalf of our programs and also for American Indians and Alaskan Natives within the state. So with Navajo, we had to serve on the Arizona SRC, Utah SRC, and then New Mexico SRC. Because, you know, Navajos live in Phoenix, Albuquerque, Salt Lake City, and off the reservation. So that was really important that we served that tribal VR program serve on the State Rehab Council. The other one is the statewide Independent Living Council. Those that have severe disabilities, they need a lot of the independent living services prior to going into tribal VR. So that service was really needed. That was also a way of advocating for American Indians with severe or significant disabilities to access services, to advocate on their behalf through the Independent Living Council. So the needs are being met, that the services are being extended not only on off reservation, but also on the reservation. So that was important. And then, we continue to push that. RSA commissioner continued to fund those high quality VR program proposals that are submitted, regardless if there's an announcement of we can only fund 20 this year or whatever, it was really important. And then, of course, the 10 points, the 5 years, and then the on-site technical assistance and monitoring. And then the discretionary grants, to supplement American Indian rehab projects. The Act also, we required the RSA to design a reporting system, a national database to track all the data, the number of clients that are served, the number of clients that are placed into employment outcomes. What does that look like? The number of individuals who are going into post-secondary education or just into training. So the different data that's needed to really also present a picture that tribal VR programs are providing quality services. They are doing employment outcomes. They are providing VR services because we're always told you have to provide services comparable to a state VR agency, So, and then the eligibility criteria is that the person has to have a permanent disability, that they would benefit from VR services, and that their disability is an impediment to employment. They have to reside on and near the reservation, and that they will benefit from VR services, and that they will become employed. And then the amendment to the Act was also to enable funds allocated to the state VR agencies that they don't use because the money just goes back. Why not use some of that money to also fund those programs that are funded, those applications that are fundable? So that was one thing that we requested for. And then, the remaining 12, the 12 on down, you can look at those things. The other area is that we really needed professionals in the field, because VR, I believe, is still very new in Indian country. And, when they apply, staff apply, they're coming with backgrounds that they either worked at Indian Health Services, they worked in mental health, they work in behavioral health, but only a few will come in with a degree or with a background that they worked in vocational rehabilitation, either with the tribe or with the state. So professional development was very key in that we needed that. So we looked at, that was one area that we looked at. And then, as you can see, the rest you can, take a look, you can review that. Again, we also requested for continuing rehab programs to be established on reservation. Since KNAR started in '93, the first office for 3 years was at University of Northern Colorado, RSEP. Then after that, it transferred to NAU AirTech. That was under the leadership of Dr. Priscilla Sanderson. And then after that, it got transferred to Natchitoches, Louisiana, and that's when we had the first executive director of KNAR, Joe Kelly. He was there. He was a project director of Intertribal Tribal in Louisiana. I'm sorry, I don't remember the VR name, but I mean the program name. But that's where he became the first executive director. And after that, it went to Michigan. Randy Slickers was the executive director, and then now, currently, it's in Louisiana under the leadership and the president of KNAR, Lenore Corral. And the following are the past presidents: Rusty Cantrell, Mike Hermanson, Sid Claymore, Joe Kelly, and myself. Next. And the current mission, mission of KNAR is, to be a voice for many tribal members to empower American and Alaskan Natives with disabilities through education and advocacy, a full inclusion. The primary goals are to nationally be recognized as an advocate program to influence changes in legislation for full inclusion of American Indians with disabilities. The values are in education, advocacy, accountability, culturally centered, inclusion, innovation, and honor. The funding from the 1990s, it started with 3.8 million. At that time, there were 14 grants that were funded, with 10 continuing, with 4 new. And then 91 all the way down to 1999, it went to 17.2 million. So each year you will notice that there's a growth, there's an increase of cases and increase of tribal VR. 1990, there were 14. By 1999, there were 55. And then RSA established the GEPRA, the performance in the results. The only data that we have from that was, the number of programs that reported. This data we got from RSA, so you will see for yourself the number of clients that were served and the number of employment. One of the positive things that I really commend the tribal VR programs of is that employment has always been 60% and over, and I know there are challenges, on job placement in Indian country, because the resources, especially with the pandemic that happened. So, but they worked hard, because a counselor, the VR counselor, becomes the jack and the Jill of all trades to these consumers, to the consumers. They become partners because informed choice is really important. And they work hard, they have to be creative. And some of the programs, they're not at the same, Black Navajo Nation has a staff of over 20 plus of the VR, where some programs, there may be 5, and then the project directors are also carrying a caseload. So, it's, so we all come together. And one of the things we did when KNAR was established is that we said, yes, we compete every 5 years, we're competitors. But one of the things we decided to do is that we're going to put that word aside, and we're going to come together and help each other. We will share policies, we will share forms, we will talk, we will communicate. And that continues today on the listserv for 121 programs. So I think that that's something that's different from any other organization. Even though we're competitors, we communicate, we come together, and we share information. And that's what's unique about Tribal VR program. Next. Winona. Okay, this is a continuation. Elmer, I don't know if you want to say anything about this section.
I think that where you have the state rehab council, there was in the earlier amendment, when the each state will do their state agency plan, their state plans. And in doing that, they were required to consult with Indian tribes. I don't know if that is still in the law or not. And that also is similar to the SRC idea, where you need input. And so, no, I don't have any other, but it's really good to hear that 60% of positive placement is really good. It's very, yeah, as Treva was saying, that it's very challenging, but yeah, those counselors have to really be creative and make a lot of, they have to collaborate with a lot of agencies to get those placements. And that's very encouraging and very something very positive. Thanks,
One of
Treva.
the things that happened in the 90s is that it used to be that you have 90 days to determine eligibility since from the day the person applies to your program, but that changed to 60 days because you're gathering data, you're getting medical records, you're gathering supporting documents to determine eligibility. Also, the handicap changed to disability, impairment changed to impediment to employment, and then employability changed to employment outcome. Also, the state plan continues today, so that's where it's important for Tribal VR members, the directors, to be at the table when those changes are being made. And then the other one is the consumer. It went from clients to consumer based on their unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, inclusion. And then IWRP, which used to be individualized written rehabilitation plan, changed to IPE, individualized plan for employment. So that was the other thing that also changed. The other one I really kind of want to focus on is the transition of high school students with disabilities, even though RSA used to tell us that transition is not something that you should really be focused on, but you can't help it because there are high schools on reservations. There are high schools where, students with disabilities are in special ed programs and they're being referred to your program. So, that transition is very key. And through this transition, through the last amendment, the Rehab Act, the state agencies now have to allocate 15% of their dollars to high schools to address the youth with disabilities. So I don't know how many of that is being addressed when you go to your SRC meeting. Are those monies going funneling to the high schools on the reservation? Are they meeting the needs of youth with disabilities that are also coming, being referred to Tribal VR? So that's really key. That's something that I had a conference call with NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians, and also NIEA. And that was one thing that I really stressed that they need to really start working with the schools to make sure that those funds are being funneled to their schools, to their public school systems. So that's really important. The other one is that the state SRC, the independent living, it used to be that the tribes were the only ones that were required to have a cooperative agreement, but then some states were not in support of that. So we add language to say, okay, the states should also be responsible to have a cooperative agreement come together. Because if a program does not get refunded, there should be language in there to say if that should happen when they reapply, how will they collaborate to ensure that, especially those clients who have IPE plans in place that are receiving services, that they continue to receive that services. So it's really important how those cooperative agreements are established and put together. That's a safety net, that's important. So I wanted to mention that. And then again, of course, I've touched on the professional and development for, Tribal VR programs. Okay. And then one of the things that also came out of KNAR was the National Rehab Cultural Initiative under the leadership of Dr. Bobby Atkins from San Diego, and then Fred McFarland, who was the co-director of the Inner Institute. Next, we first met with the Rehab Cultural Diversity and RCDI in San Diego when they came together. That was the first introduction of KNAR, and that was the first introduction about Tribal VR. They talked about cultural diversity, and that was the time to present, what KNAR was about, that we needed their support, and that, these are the areas and the states where Tribal VR programs are. How can we get to come together with our set of the Region 10s to really push the initiative on cultural diversity on the agenda on professional development. So that was the first time KNAR was introduced to our RCDI, and San Diego took the lead in that, and Dr. Bobby Atkins and Fred McFarland, had really taken the lead, and that's how with KNAR, and that's how we really push our agenda to also advocate and also present at the different sections across the country of what Tribal VR program was and what it does and how it differs from the state agency and how it partners with the state agency. So that was what RCDI, helped in supporting KNAR and Tribal VR program. In 1979, 1997 to 1999. One of the things that RSA wanted to do was to conduct 30 on-site monitoring and evaluation to look at the effectiveness, the quality, accountability, compliance, and positive outcome in all facets of the program operation, client services, physical management, the whole thing. So they selected on-site evaluators from the state, from Client Assistance Program, from the state Rehab Council, from Indian professionals, American Indian professionals in education, health, from tribal governments. And they looked at these areas: administration management, case management, physical management, state tribal relationship, the self-assessments by programs. Do they have inside evaluations? How do they conduct that? And then with each tribe of the 30, they said, we will look at 50 cases. But for Navajo, they said, because of the size of the program, they wanted to look at 150 cases. Of course, I said that wasn't fair, but they said that has to be. So Navajo, we had to put out 150 cases for them to evaluate. And they evaluated that. And then after that, they said, okay, 1999, we're going to do a cluster evaluation, which was done by Dr. Richard Corbridge out of Region 10, RSA. And he went in his RV and he went through the Southwest, Northwest, South, and North Central to evaluate almost all the programs. But the first evaluation, it came out that we were in compliance. The programs were effective. There was accountability, there was quality, there was culturally appropriate services that were being provided, and the client's needs were being met. We were going according to the eligibility criteria. We were providing quality IPE plans. There were employment outcomes. So, and then the same thing happened with Richard Corbridge when he went on site to meet, and look at the programs. He actually went to the reservations to evaluate the programs, look at cases and doing all that. Next. So there were two evaluations that were done. And then they said, okay, we're going to do another evaluation by Development Associates. It would be a national study, again, of 30 programs, to look at the same thing. And then they looked at the described analysis, the characteristic, identified all these areas were evaluated again. And again, the outcome was positive. That we were comparable, and even in employment areas, we were even higher of an employment outcome of 60% and higher, compared to the state agencies. So there are a lot of evaluations that were done on tribal VR programs. Navajo Nation was evaluated. The first one was an individual that came out from DC. He evaluated the program. The second one, we call it the bidder report. Probably Elmer can talk about some of that. And then the third one was the RSA commissioner, the 3 regional RCEP directors, the RSA regional directors, the state agencies, they all came and they wanted to look at the program. So, you know, that's an indication that the travel VR programs are providing quality services. There are challenges. I think in any area there are challenges, but they are overcoming that. You know, and they're providing the services that the clients need. And that's what, you know, KNAR has been advocating for. So, but if you say, well, I don't want to be evaluated, but that also tells you where you need to improve and where you need to, probably there's some areas that you need to be doing and getting new ideas, listening, and that also helps you build and strengthen your program. So Elmer, do you want to say anything about the bidder report?
Thanks, Treva. I think when we were working on with Congress trying to make amendments to the Rehabilitation Act, they don't believe you when you tell them that we are doing a good job. We're, you know, rehabilitating people. We're following all of the rules and everything. But they want somebody else to say that for you. So back then we hired Dr. James Spitter from University of Northern Colorado to evaluate our cases at Navajo. And he gave us a really good report, but for some reason we were calling it the Bitter Report because that was his name. But yeah, that was the initial one. I think we did that on our own, simply because I think RSA will always want to know if you're doing your work properly. Is there accountability? It's probably not going to end, but I think the Indian projects are continuously showing that they are doing good work. And so I think on the other hand, I think it's good that they're kind of keeping tabs on us so we can be careful. Yeah, I think it's good. It's good to, I think it'd be good to kind of look at some other areas that might be beneficial, like that transition that Treva mentioned. How's that working? How are they working with the Indian VR projects, for example? What collaboration are there between the states and the tribes? I think there's some other areas they probably should look at instead of looking at the same old thing. But that's my comment. I always kind of like to pick on RSA every now and then.
Okay, and then the American Indian VR history also included the traditionally underserved population. This is in the Rehab Act. You know, the work-related disability for American Indian is 1.5 times that of the general population. So this was documented that there is a need for travel VR programs, you know, in Indian country. There is, you know, also regarding recruitment of minority professionals and then training. With the travel VR programs, they just have, compared to the state agencies, they have like blind services in some states are separate from the VR. They have training components, they have professional development, and all the other support system services that they need for their staff and to support the whole RSA component with travel VR programs. You know, that's not really there. So as KNAR, as being the vehicle and the voice, that's something that we know we really worked hard to push so that the tribes have that support system and professional development and training, and, you know, also communicating among themselves on the different challenges or any best practices that they have that they would like to share. So, you know, career development, higher education, you know, I like to commend Northwest Indian College, Southern University, San Diego State, Western Washington, Assumption College, you know, all the way across. They had really stepped forward in supporting KNAR and being also the voice and coming to the table and advocating and establishing, you know, and providing that professional development. So there are more Native American and Alaska Natives that have that background to train and also run, quality programs. Okay, next. That's the capacity building. Dr. Marie Guillermo, Dr. Madan can do out of Southern University. Of course, Dr. Lee Gaseoma, Winona Reed, and also Jimmy Warren. Jimmy Warren had really also done a tremendous job at San Diego State through his Pet Air program, where a lot of the travel VR programs participated in that. At first, it was just a certificate program, but a lot of them obtained their undergrad and graduate degrees in vocational rehabilitation. So, he ran that Pet Air program through San Diego State. The same thing, the same with the individuals that are, in the picture. So I want to commend them for what they've done in that field. I'd like to give some time to Lee and Winona if they want to say any more on that. Winona? Okay, quiet means no. Okay, the history of the 2000 allocation and programs. As you can see, there's, we started at 23 million. By 2014, it was at 43 million. And the number of new programs, the continuing grants, and then the total grants, so there's, continue to be a growth in tribal VR programs. I know there are over 500 tribes, recognized tribes, but we continue to move forward. We also are open to any new programs that come forward and providing the support. So that's one reason why we really looked at continuation funding, not permanent, so that when programs are funded, they don't have to apply every 5 years, that they continue based on the performance outcome, that they will continue to be funded. The Rehab Act hasn't really been reauthorized, so that's language that we have on the table from KNAR to ensure that there is continuation funding. And hopefully, that will, and then CSAVR has also supported that language. Next. And then the number of clients that were served as of 2018, there were over close to 8,000 that were served, and then over close to 3,000 that were rehabilitated. So there is continuous growth. Sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up, but you will note that the employment outcome, the successful outcome, is in the 60s. There continues to be, like in 2018, it was at 68.2%. So, the programs are providing quality services. They are meeting the needs of their consumers. They are job placing, so there continues to be a need for tribal VR program. So the data shows that. And, I'm sorry, I don't have it all the way up to date, but we weren't able to get the data during, between 2012 to, but the one that we finally accessed was 2018. And that one is that over 7,000, close to 8,000 clients were served, and close to 3,000 were job placed. Okay, next. And then the history again, with the VR, the Rehab Act is now under the Workforce Investment Act, Title IV. And, it's again, the same thing is that there has to be high quality employment outcomes that are served under American Indian VR, consistent with their, the individualized strengths and all that. And that, to also, one of the things that also happened is that the mandates and authorized by the commissioner to reserve 0.5% of the funding for technical assistance and training. This last 5 years, Northwest Indian College was funded, NAU was also funded. And I'm going to go ahead and give some time to Lee to talk about what AIVRS did, and then how they collaborated with Northwest Indian College and providing that support system and services to tribal VR. Lee?
Okay. after a period of time, I don't believe anyone was specifically providing training and technical assistance to the tribal voc rehab program. But lo and behold, the summer of 2015, an announcement came out from RSA announcing competition for the National Training and TA Center to start its training in TA programs to the TVR. And NAU was successful in receiving the initial 5-year grant, and I was appointed the project director. So we recently were awarded another 5-year grant. The particular change in this new grant is to work with the Northwest Indian College to continue training of AIVRS personnel through the Tribal Vocational Institute. But sharing a little bit about what AIVRTAC has done to date is we were charged with the responsibility to provide 3 types of training and technical assistance to tribes who are currently funded by RSA. The 3 types of training included the intensive and targeted technical assistance that through a written formal agreement between the Tribal Voc Rehab Program and AIVRTAC, we would provide personalized technical assistance and coaching. Goals and objectives were developed as part of the agreement, in addition to using a logic model to assure that there is a process to operationalize the ITA agreement. And so through the development of the ITA activities and engagement from the Tribal Voc Rehab Program in designing the agenda, making plans for on-site visit, which in some cases included the attendance of tribal leadership to be at the table prior to initiating any of the ITA activities. We wanted to be respectful of and be culturally sensitive in the regard of how different tribes are serving this particular target population. And we were very fortunate to be provided community tours of the communities or villages that are being served by the Tribal Voc Rehab programs. It was also very eye-opening and insightful to recognize how the tribal communities are set up, who are the primary employers within their service area, who are the key partnership, and also meeting with some of the successful consumers who have achieved their vocational goals and are now employees of the different tribal nations. The second type of training was referred to as the targeted training in technical assistance, and examples of that include presentations primarily at the KNAR annual and mid-year conferences, and more recently a heavy focus on our webinars and talking circles on specific VR topics. We also conducted a needs assessment to be properly prepared during the COVID-19 pandemic so that there would be minimal disruption of training and TA services to the tribes that we currently work with. And I believe we have made every effort to address the existing needs of the tribal communities. We were very respectful in not trying to be so direct in making sure that the programs are participating, as some tribal governments were shut down, some programs were no longer permitted to provide personalized services. Some communities did not have reliable internet to telework, but I believe as we moved along during the past couple of months, the tribal leadership and outside resources addressed some of those needs to ensure again that the tribal communities are being served by the tribal voc rehab programs. The last type of training in TA that we offered and will continue to offer is the universal training in TA. And examples of these include our e-learning training modules on our website. We now have a pretty good amount of products and tools specifically for the tribal voc rehab program personnel to review and use as determined appropriate. We also are very happy to now announce that the National Clearinghouse Rehabilitation Training Material website is now publishing our products and tools. The TVR Institute has been a very good partner with the AIVRS. We try to keep in communication as much as possible so that we are not duplicating services. We try to ensure that as changes are being made in the tribal program directors, we are counselors, support staff, that we share that information so that we continue to maintain our contact and ensure that they are being provided the assistance that they may need, either at their request or just us reaching out to them. So overall, I believe we have made an impact in Indian country, and we are certainly very excited to continue the work with the Tribal Voc Rehab program for the next 5 years.
Okay,
Nona?
Nona, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm just making sure we're staying on target.
Okay, next. The next one.
Oh, I thought you were going to do last three. The today 46 today after 46 years, 92 programs are funded.
Mm-hmm. We still have a lot to accomplish. Why separate a VR program for American and Alaskan Natives? Or why are there two VR programs? I guess the state VR agency and tribal VR programs. Some of the areas that we looked at was in order for the individual American and Alaskan Natives to receive VR services, you know, it was important to establish the tribal VR programs because they were not receiving adequate VR services through the state VR agency. It's the rural location, access to services, tribal sovereignty, language, cultural barriers, trust issues, transportation issues. When Navajo Nation VR program was being established, a lot of the clients were being closed as lack of cooperation, unable to find, unable to locate. I always thought what was important, what I told staff was, don't expect to provide services sitting behind your desk. You need to be out there, you know, meeting with the consumers, because when you go into meet with the consumers, there's always family. And that's the difference between, you know, state and tribal VR services. So if you are going to close a case for unable to locate when there was no effort made to go out and try to locate or, you know, meet with the consumer, or if you close a case for lack of cooperation, but you've never talked to the individual, how do you justify that? So those were some of the things. And, you know, it's like when you go into the school, a lot of like when there's parent-teacher conference, a lot of the parents are not coming to the table because they feel that's not their role to do. They say, well, you know, in Navajo, they say, you know, meaning that why do I need to be sitting at the table? They're professionals. That's what they went to school for. So why do I need to be at the table at a teacher-parent conference and saying what I think is good for my child academically? They have that skill to do that. That's almost the same thing with, you know, with tribal VR. So, you know, these are some of the barriers. That's why it's really important for tribal VR programs to exist. And that's where, you know, in the prior slide, it says we have much more to accomplish. Right now, we have 92 tribal VR programs, but we still need to continue to work and advocate. So there are, you know, and who better to provide those services than tribal members themselves. Some of them, they speak the language, they're familiar with the culture, they're familiar with the environment, they're familiar with the economy on the reservation and what's available and what's not available. They know how to advocate. So, you know, that becomes a real important issue. And so that was the reason why, you know, why have a separate tribal VR program and a separate state VR agency. So that's what we were looking at when we came to the table to look at this. Thank you.
Can I add something? If you can you put, so we have these 5 areas, but if you can think of another reason why tribal VR needs to be separate and funded separate and continue, can you put that in chat so we can add to this list as well? Thank you.
Okay, next. American Indian VR. What is American Indian Vocational Rehabilitations? Is to provide, including culturally appropriate services to American Indians who are individuals with disabilities residing on or near state or federal or state reservation, consistent again with their individuals' strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. So they may be prepared for and engage in high quality employment that will increase opportunities for economic self-sufficiency. You look at when the person is determined eligible, you look at, you know, everything, because I always say it's like putting out an ingredients on the table to say, okay, these are the ingredients I need to prepare this meal or to prepare this. So when you're developing the IPE plan, you're looking at all these, the strengths of the individual. What are their, do they have any transferable skills? Where did they work? What does their education background look like? Is if the person has a multiple disability, which one is the primary? How do you determine that's the primary disability, the secondary? You know, you look at all that. What is their choice? Because right now, the individual has a lot of say in how the plans are developed. Who are the key players? What is the cost? And what is the timeline for these services to take place in order for them to become employed? What are they getting employed in? Is it in you know, nursing, or is it in self-employment? And what will that look like? So you're looking at the overall of the overall plan with the consumer. And they're sitting there at the table with you when you're developing these plans. So at the end, they are successful regardless of their disability, and they become self-sufficient. And what is their support base that they will continue, you know, and what are the tools that they will need? What will the costs look like? So those are all things that you look at, you know, when you develop those plans. So in a nutshell, this is what tribal VR is. And with Navajo, you know, we use the Navajo cycle of life, and we, you know, it's now Navajo cycle of services. It's in the 4 directions, and the Navajo basket is very important everything is to the east. You can see that the basket is open to the east. That's the intake. That's the mental, the thinking, that's a head case. You know, so when the person comes in, you take an intake, you're looking at everything. And then the south is the eligibility. You determine eligibility. Now you're developing the plan for services. Not so you're in communication with the consumer, and they're very much a part of that plan. And then the west is when the services are being implemented, enough the emotion. And who are the players that are providing these services? Is the consumer very much involved in the services, and they're, you know, that they are receiving the quality of services that they're needing in order for them to be successful? And then the north is the spiritual resilience. It says, and you know, the work and the independence. So this is the cycle that Navajo is using. I don't know if Elmer wants to say anything about this from the Navajo perspective.
I think, yeah, this is what we use also here at Navajo Tech. Basically, you want to do something, you think about it, and then talk about it, and then plan it out. And then you do it, and then you evaluate it. So a citizen is basically evaluating what the plan that you put together, perhaps like for the first semester, and then it will continue to the next semester. So then you think about the next semester. So it's always continuous, then not at the same level, but a little bit higher, because the first year you practiced it, and then the next year, how are you going to do better, kind of thing. So it's a good model. It's a good thing to use. And non-Navajos really accept it too, because it works well for them as well. How are they teaching? How can they do better? If all the students pass or not, and why, and that kind of thing. So it's a good model. It works both ways.
Okay, next. And the VR services are on a reservation or near a reservation. For Navajo, it extends into Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. And I believe there's also a stretch that Elmer mentioned at the beginning of the presentation in Colorado. There are 5 agencies, you know, Shiprock, Crown Point, Fort Defiance, Chinle, Western Agency, which includes Tuba City and Kayenta. And then Lee is right there, was in the Tuba City Agency and also Chinle. And then there are 2 satellite communities, Tohajile, which is outside of about 30 miles before you get into Albuquerque, and then also Alamo, which is on the outskirts also of the reservation. So the geographic location of where tribes are, their service area, you know, Navajo is a huge area. And also, again, and then extending beyond 20-mile radius outside the reservation. So the counselors, you know, they have a lot of areas to cover. They have to travel, you know, distance to do follow-ups, you know, attending to referrals if evaluations are needed. So it's a huge geographic location that they cover, which is also, I think, Navajo, I believe Fort Mojave also extends into 3 states, Arizona, Nevada, and California. And then up in Standing Rock, Sioux, they have both North and South Dakota, the reservation extends into. So the different geographic location is also really important. And so they have, you know, when we're talking about on and near, what does the area look like? So this is the area of location that that Navajo covers. And if somebody from Flagstaff, they have a lot of areas to cover. So that was one of the also the reasons why, when at the onset, why Tribal VR program was provided with the start of Navajo Nation. Next.
The mountain in your background, is it Mount Taylor? This one?
Mount
One
Taylor.
of the
Yes, it's one of the 4 sacred mountains.
These are the 4 sacred mountains.
Yeah, one is Flagstaff, you know, San Francisco Peak, Mount Hermes.
That's my background right here.
Uh-huh. Okay, next. And then the comparison between state VR agencies and tribal VR. Tribal VR programs under the tribal government, they're not all under education. Some of them are under education, some of them are under labor, some of them are under health, and some of them are in tribal colleges. With the state VR agency, they're under the state government. There's a 90% federal, 10% match from the tribe. With the state, it's 21.3 state match with 78.7 of the federal funds. And then the cooperative agreements, the on and near reservation, you know, and then with the state, it's statewide, regardless if there's a tribal VR program. They also fund the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and Guam. American Indians with disabilities are who we serve. And some of them, they only serve enrolled members. With Navajo, we serve all American Indians that meet the eligibility criteria. Way back when we started our VR program, we even served non-natives. But we were told that, you know, that's not what the funding is for. So we were open to that because there were some non-natives that was too far for them to travel, like the Flagstaff. So we serve some of the individuals with it. We serve people with disabilities, you know, but that one, now we serve all American Indians, Alaskan Natives with disabilities. The enrolled members with tribal VR, they have to establish policies and procedures. The state, it's already set the policies and procedures. The programs under tribal VR, the project director is responsible for the program operation, the physical management. Some of them are carrying caseloads. With the states, they have district supervisors, they have state supervisors, they have the VR counselors, they have the support staff, job coaching, and all the other, you know, support system that they have. Professional development and training is very key in tribal VR. With the state, they have state staff development, they have training components, they have assistive technology, and all the other support systems. They also, some states have separate blind service agencies. Partnership is very key for tribal VR programs because network, they look for comparable benefits. Public awareness is also really important. And then dual cases. There continues to be dual cases between state and tribal VR. And, you know, that's really important. I know in Navajo, there are quite a few dual cases with Arizona and New Mexico and some with Utah. So when both sides have an employment outcome, they both claim the numbers. So, you know, dual cases is important, especially for the near reservation language. And then there are independent living programs and centers for the state agencies. There's community rehab programs with staff, you know, some tribes, they only have 3 or 5 staff or up to 20. With the state agencies, you know, they have a lot of offices. They probably have 500 staff, you know, or more, or 200. The grant, the funding is that it's a 5-year discretionary competitive grant. It's not guaranteed, you know, and with the state, it's, you know, it's continuous. And then there are reporting systems. So collaboration is very key. And then the other thing is the order of selection. We have to also put that has to be in our grant. The order of selection is if you're still providing services, but you run out of money, you go to that. So the majority of them is that the first thing is that we're going to serve the most significant or severe individuals with disabilities. So if an individual does not fall into that category, they apply, more than likely, you know, they may not be able to be determined eligible because there's not funding enough to fund everybody to provide services to everybody. And then the annual reporting that's, you know, that's submitted every year. And then at the end of the 5 years, there's the final report that's submitted. And then the support system is KNAR for tribal VR. And then, you know, here, there's the New Mexico State Department of Education, the Arizona Department of Economic Security, the Utah Department of Workforce Development, the National the National Organization for Blind Services, the state SRC, the Independent Living, the University CSAVR, the NRA, the RSA. So you can see the comparison between the two, the tribal VR and the state. And that's why, even though there's limited resources, the tribal VR departments, the tribal VR programs have to provide services comparable to the state agencies, and their employment outcome regardless has been 60% and higher. So, those are some of the comparison. I'm sure you can add to that too. Next. And then, one shoes does not fit all. And of course, the employment outcome can be anything, regardless of the person's disability. They can, become teachers, they can become, whatever that they set their mind to do, regardless of the disabilities. It's not only being an assistant to something or, doing self-employment. Next. And then one shoe doesn't fit all. All people with learning disabilities needs is not the same, for everybody. That's why it's called individualized. There has to be guidance, there has to be opportunities, direction, choices, and support in order for the person to be self-sufficient. Next. Yeah, that's what I have. I don't know if Elmer has any remarks.
I just want to mention that I think we're always trying to look at opportunities for services on Indian communities, as well as to improve what's being provided or not being provided. There is a new executive order that President Biden signed, and it's to strengthen educational opportunity for equity, excellence, and economic opportunity for Native Americans, and looking at tribal colleges. And I think it'd be a good thing to look at to see how the transition is being done with the schools to and VR. I think it's something to look at. It's fairly new. It was just signed recently, and especially when there are some VR programs at tribal colleges. And there is an advisory. Treva mentioned that she met with NACI and NCA with NIEA. But there is another organization called NACI, Native American Advisory Council to Department of Education, and U.S. President will appoint members to those appoint members to NACI. And it'd be good to have someone from Tribal Deep VR to serve on that. I think. Just a comment. Thanks.
Before we wrap up, is there any comments, observation from our webinar attendees? We would like to hear from you. You may also make comments on the presentation itself. We still have time, so anyone can chime in.
Congratulations on your award, Lee. That's awesome.
Yes, thank you. There is.
So I wanted to say that the presentation will be emailed out to everyone, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as the video recording and the survey. The survey is very important to us, so if you can please complete that. The link is in the chat box, but it will also be emailed to you. I also wanted to thank immensely to the Treva and Elmer and Lee there's that, there's that standing on the shoulders of giants. And I feel like that's how I feel all the time coming in during the capacity building days. There's so much involvement and leadership from all of you, and I admire you and I appreciate you. Thank you for everything that you have done. And I try to do my best every day in the work that I do working with tribal VR programs. So thank you.
Lee, before I wanted to mention that KNAR did respond to that Biden's tribal consultation. We submitted our comments, we submitted our information. We will take a look at that. If you have anything on it, Elmer, if you can forward that to me. The other one, I noticed that August Martin also chimed in. One of the things that KNAR also did was August used to be a project director, tribal VR director up in Alaska. And I talked with RSA and I said, we really need a Native American at the desk and RSA. So that's how we were able to really work with August. And he's now at RSA. And he has done, a tremendous job and looking out for us, and also, being one of the project officers from RSA and providing guidance and also helping the tribal VR program. So thank you, August. And then to all the past president of KNAR, to all the former program directors and the current program directors like Mary Marivia, and all the others that are still there, moving forward and helping individuals with disabilities. So thank you. There's so many people to thank. KNAR got to where it's at with a lot of people at the table, and being, the past vice presidents and all that. So thank you very much. If you hadn't done, also thanks Elmer for being the setting the foundation for tribal VR.
It was a lot of volunteer work as well. So if you're ever interested in volunteering for KNAR, please contact Lenore and who else? Rachel, Treva, anyone. But a lot of it was on volunteer basis.
In closing, I also want to say kwakwa. That's in Hopi, that's thank you. I'm saying kwakwa to all the tribal rehab programs, our partners who are participating in today's webinar. I want to thank Treva and Elmer for their wisdom. I believe we're all resident elders now in our respective homes and workplaces. And I do appreciate your sharing of your knowledge and your expertise. I also want to wish each and every one of you and your families a safe and happy Thanksgiving. The new year is just right around the corner. And one last thing I would also like to comment on is, with all the hard work that has taken place to date, we constantly have to keep in mind that we need to make every effort to sustain the tribal vocational rehabilitation program in our respective community, and making sure that there is a table for the population that we are serving, that we listen to them first and make sure that they have a voice in making decisions for their future. I also want to note that I believe at the national level, a lot is taking place with Deb Holland being in a very key position to now listen to us and to advocate for us. And she too is wanting our contribution, our prayers to ensure that the Native Americans are not forgotten. Wakwa.
Lee, it looks like you're in a plane. Flying.
Yes, I am. I'm already making a head start in front of Santa Claus.
What are you holding on to? The turkey's tail?
Yes.
He's practicing his selfies.
Okay, thank you, Nona and Lee. Thank you for all the work that you do and bringing AirTech, AIVRS, and now there's a new program. So congratulations on the new funding.
Thank you.
And happy Thanksgiving to all.